Welcome to a Leader's Journey podcast. I'm your host, Joel Gunn. My friend Shane Pulver is with us on the show today. We've known each other about 10 years. He is a CEO of a large company. Maybe he'll talk more about that here in a second. Kind of a serial entrepreneur, maybe in some ways, had a couple of businesses over the years. But Shane, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you, Joel. Appreciate it. Good to be here.
Yeah. So I had the privilege of being in the audience a couple of months ago at a conference you were speaking at, and you said something that got my interest. You said there was a transition from profit and loss to people and legacy. Let's unpack that, and you can start a little bit about who you are and maybe your background, and then let's talk about profit and loss and people and legacy.
You bet. Appreciate that. Yeah, I think this year's been really a transformational year in a lot of ways. Abacus Solutions Group, the company that you mentioned that we founded in 2005, we're a defense contractor. So we do mostly information technology work for the federal government, 150 or so employees. So not tiny, but not huge. That company turned 20 this year. I hit,
Congratulations.
thank you. I hit 31 years of marriage in April. I
Awesome.
turned 56 in July, and our daughter is officially in Atlanta, and we are empty nesters. So it's been really a transition year in a lot of ways. Earlier this year, Robert Vogel, a mutual friend of ours, we were I think we were over at Connected, and we were at a function there, and he mentioned that this series he does on leadership, and we were talking sort of about Abacus and that 20 years, and that's fairly rare for small businesses, and just my reflection. And he said, "Hey, would you be willing to speak to us?" And sort of that led to really this entire year has been a year of reflection and thinking about, what moments in this 20 years have been the most impactful. And when we started, to your point earlier, as a young business, profit and loss is king, right? It's the way that you measure everything. Are the doors open tomorrow? Are we eating? Are we employing people? But yet, when I really started to reflect, none of the moments that meant the most to me had anything to do with how much profit we made. It
Mm,
was, and so as I thought about that, I'm like, why is it not people and legacy versus profit and loss? Because that's really what when I think about the moments of these 20 years, when I think about why we do this, when I think about, what's going to resonate long term, it's more about the people that we work with and the legacy create. Profit and loss is important, but I'm not going to remember what our P&L said from 2023 in 20 years. I'm just not. I'm going to
mhm.
remember those people that we talked about, the Pams and the Rockies, and that's what I'm going to remember. So that's really what we talked about, and I think that's kind of what we want to unpack a little bit more today.
Yeah, we both have been around the C12 circles over the years, and that's how we first met. One of their taglines is "No margin, no mission." And to your point earlier, you've got to have P&L. A friend we have in common says you can run out of cash once.
Yeah.
Yeah. um, so obviously as a business, P&L matters. And because you're making profit, you are able to employ people and invest in them. But I think a lot of leaders, like you're describing here, you start to elevate it beyond the P&L. It becomes something more than P&L. And that's where you started, as you said, looking at people and legacy. And I think it's cool, the way you did the two P&Ls, and that was one of the things that caught my attention at your talk. When did that first start happening for you? I mean, was that, 6 months into the new business, 6 years? You've been going 20 years. Do you remember like a particular transition point?
Well, I think that's another really interesting part of my story is that 20 years ago when we started Abacus, I was not a believer. I
Hmm.
had no interest or thought in faith at all. In fact, my business partner now jokes with me. He was a believer when we started, but it was very much church on Sunday, work the rest of the week. So we never really discussed faith at work. And I would often tell him that faith was for people that didn't believe enough in themselves, and that was me. That was me 20 years ago, Joel. And there were some I think really critical moments in the Lord grabbing a hold of me. There were a handful of okays, and just surrendering. And I think, today when I look at running a business as a non-believer who thinks they're all that's needed, and a believer who understands that we're nothing without Him, I think that is a huge part of that journey. And really, it all started. Um, 17 years ago or so. I'm on the way. I'm driving down 35, and I'm pretty sure I'm having a heart attack. And I call my wife and I tell my wife that meet me at Northeast Baptist. I think I'm having a heart attack. And so gets in the car and flies over to Northeast Baptist. And I joke that if you're in your late 30s and a white male and you've got chest pain and a left numb arm, there's not much waiting line at the ER back then. So they, they fire me right in. They throw me on the table. They hook me up to an EKG. They do a million tests. They even do a treadmill test, Joel.
Hmm.
What I learned then and what I know now is that the problem with my heart was the Lord wasn't in it.
Mm.
It was my company and my employees and my P&L and my responsibilities. And I was trying to carry the weight of the world on my shoulders and do it on my own. And we're just not built that way. And I was killing myself with stress because it was all about me. And I think that is probably when, so a few months after that, the Lord really steps in with people in my life to begin that faith journey that has now led me here. So if it had not been for my wife and our first employee and my business partner, um, I am nearly certain I would not be sitting here today. I'm nearly certain we wouldn't be in business 20 years. And I don't know if I'd be celebrating almost 32 years of marriage. So I
Mm.
just, it's been people that have really impacted this legacy more than P&L.
Yeah, and I think a lot of leaders know that, in their heart, regardless of whether they're leading for profit, nonprofit, large, small. But it's so easy to get sucked into the P&L, right? It's so easy to get sucked into the business and the day to day. How do you pull yourself out of that? When you find out, hey, I'm too focused on the business and not enough on people, or is that not an issue for you anymore?
Well, I think it's always going to be an issue, right? I think that one of the things that I try to remind myself of daily, when I was focused only on the business and a non-believer, I held everything like this, white knuckle grip on the business. And now I've learned to hold it like this, right? It's truly not ours. It's the Lord's. And I think if we can remember that, I tell people all the time, look, we're in charge of the actions. He's in charge of the results. It's not up to us. Like, we've got to show up every day. We've got to do the best that we can for him and for our people. We've got to serve him daily in our work. But once we do that, the results are truly up to him. And if we are willing to run our business in such a manner that we accept whatever results he gives us, it just changes the perspective on everything. I mean, we do critical work here, but we're not flying airplanes or saving babies. And I literally tell my folks that every day, like, do the best that you can, but you've got to, like, it's got to start with me as a servant of Jesus Christ, then as a husband, then as a father, and then as a business owner. And I can't, they're ranked really closely together, but I cannot forget. One of the other things I love to say is there's no U-Hauls behind hearses. We're just not taking anything with us, Joel. And I think that perspective that we've only got so long here, and what we do with that time and how we invest that time. And again, I'm not taking away from the profit and loss of running a business. If we weren't running a successful business, we couldn't employ 150 people. We couldn't do great things. We couldn't have charities that we support. But we cannot not forget that it's really about the people and not about the money that makes this whole thing worth it.
Yeah. You shared a story in your talk that there was a time you had to make a choice, a difficult choice, because what reminded me was a moment ago you said, uh, you got to manage it the business with an open hand, right? You do what you can do, and he's responsible for the results. And you shared a story about there was a customer that you had, and some things were not kosher, and so you made a tough call. And actually, there's been a happy ending, and I don't want
Yeah.
to say too much. So,
No, that's I really appreciate it. In fact, it was that was all happening as I was preparing for the talk. So it couldn't the timing could not have been better. But to back up, about 3 years ago, 3.5 years ago, in sort of the middle of COVID, one of our largest prime contractors, we're defense contractors. So sometimes we work directly with the government. Sometimes we work with the really big companies, the SCICs, the Lockheeds of the world. And one of those companies was going through an acquisition. We had been another subcontractor. We had been there for a long time. We had 70 plus employees on that program. It was literally 60% of our revenue. And the leadership called us up one day and said, we are ending your subcontract with us. They didn't give us a reason. They didn't have to. They could do it if they wanted to. But you always have a non-compete clause where you can't take their employees and they can't take yours. That's written into all subcontracts. But they said, you are either going to allow us to hire all of your employees, or they're all going to be terminated in 3 weeks and we'll go hire new people.
a
So yeah, you've just
little
lost
bit of a stiff arm there.
60% of your revenue. Now the decision is, do we give up all the people we've hired and interviewed and recruited and relocated and spent training on and resources on? Do we just walk away from that, or do we fight them and probably still lose? And I think, Joel, the point that I brought up in that discussion was that if you're holding it like this, it's screw those guys. We're going to fight them, and we're going to do whatever it takes. And if those employees lose their jobs, they lose their jobs. But when you're holding it like this and it's not yours, we made the decision that we would personally call every one of those employees and tell them to take that new job because they needed to feed their families, and eventually we'd be okay. And it was tough, but I think that when you have the right perspective, it's not really that tough. If you run your business well, but you also follow your heart and you know whose you are, those tough decisions aren't that hard. So we made the decision. We called every one of those employees. We lost all that work. But right about that time, we started winning some other work. Within a year or two, we had recovered our revenue. And sort of the part of that full circle story that I mentioned in our talk, Joel, was that about probably about 2 months ago now, one of the executives from here in San Antonio that I had a close relationship with emailed me completely out of the blue. And he said, "Hey, Shane, do you remember me?" Like, yeah, like I don't remember you. And
You took 60% of my business.
he said, he said that the contract is coming back up for recompete. I would like to right some of the wrongs of the leadership in the past. We want you guys back on the team for the new contract. And it was an email, Joel, I never thought I would get.
Mhm.
And all glory to God. Right now, he didn't have to do that. The story would have been the story, whether that work came back or not. But I think in this case, it just does present a story of, if we're faithful and if we follow him in everything that we do, things can come back around. That work starts in January. It's a huge contract for us for the next 5 to 10 years.
Wow.
And it's just one of those. It just couldn't have come at a like I could not have scripted that. Only the Lord could script that entire story. That executive and I went to breakfast about 3 weeks ago. Things are rolling along great, and we're gonna do a bunch more work with that company. So
Wow.
it was just, again, it was just, you could not write that script for that to happen. In fact, I showed the email in that talk you were at, just because it's one of those things where, yeah, right, sure, Shane, this is Hallmark, come on.
Yeah, that was, and if I recall correctly, over the last few years, your revenue had gotten back and surpassed. So even before winning this big contract, you'd already been restored back to and more to where you were just a few years
Yes,
ago.
sir. Yeah, 100%. And so this is going to be another beautiful opportunity to serve him and to serve this customer well, and to employ 20, 30, 40 more people. So it's just, we are excited about it. We are going to honor it. We're going to do well with it. But I think it's just, I think one of the points that I made was that non-believer Shane, 20-year ago Shane, might have come to that same conclusion, but would not have done it for the same reasons, would
Hmm.
not have had as much peace with it. We all think we're a good guy, right? But we need great men. We don't need good guys.
Hmm.
And I
That's good.
think you get there by knowing who you're serving on a daily basis. And that's not the P&L. That's our Lord and Savior and our people and our legacy.
Yeah, and like you said, that Shane from 20 years ago might have reached the same conclusion about, well, let them take my employees, right? But you probably would have been on your way to the hospital again, because it's you just totally different attitude, right? You would have compromised, but you probably wouldn't have had a good attitude about it. Versus you were genuinely able to just let it go and say, this is what's best for the people, and my reward's somewhere else anyway. So I don't have to have that in this moment. Yeah, but it's cool of God to bring it back around and just say, if you do things the right way for the right reasons, I got a way of taking care of things.
Well, and I think part of the reason that happened too was for me to be able to tell that story, right? I think that
Hmm.
telling that story made it redemptive in that moment. And so I think it was just a great, I mean, the revenue's awesome, but really the testimony and the power of that
Hmm.
story, I think, is more important than the revenue.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Shane, it's always a pleasure, and we could go on for another hour as we often have. But let's just bring this episode to a close. Any final thoughts?
I just think that, I told a handful of stories about some of those people that have impacted Abacus over this 20-year journey. And I just think that what I want to bring to close with profit and loss versus people and legacy is that, like, if we can really hone in as leaders, if we can hone in on those folks that really truly make a difference in our organization and love on them and lead them and help them through their legacy, I think that's what makes a lasting impact in business.
Hmm.
Again, I don't know how many people that have run a business for 20 years know what their P&L was 18 years ago, right? They don't, but they do know those lives that they impacted and those people that they led and those legacies they built. So I just want to close with that's really like, I think one of the things that hit me was profit fades, people last, and legacy echoes in eternity.
That's great. Shane, brother, thank you so much for your time, and love to have you back on the show one of these days.
Yeah.
But yeah,
Appreciate
blessings
you.
to you, brother.
Have a great day. Thank you.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of A Leader's Journey podcast. If you enjoyed it, give us a thumbs up and remember to subscribe to our channel.